Hello everyone, we are obviously from FutureGov. My name's Amy Ricketts and this is Nina Timmers, and we're really excited to talk to you today about designing for local government and what that looks like for us. So I'm a service designer, Nina is an organisation designer. If you want to know what that is, one of our colleagues, Adam, did a talk, I think on your first one, and that's recorded, so watch that. It's a really great, interesting video, but we won't talk about that too much today. So our backgrounds, we didn't start in these careers, as you'd imagine. So my background is graphic design, Nina is in product, and we come from a diverse range of backgrounds at FutureGov. But what unites us is a real passion for redesigning public services. So pretty much all of our work is in local government. We have done a bit of work with central government. So local government is everything from kind of city and boroughs down to parishes. So it's kind of a real kind of range of sizes. And we'll talk a little bit today about kind of what design in that context looks like. So FutureGov is about 9 years old. We're made up of about 25 people in London. We have an office in Sydney as well. And we tend to work with local authorities. We get commissioned in, so we do anywhere between kind of 3 and 9 months with the local authority. We kind of base ourselves in their service, and we've worked on a complete range of projects. So anything from complicated and kind of relationship-based services around social care. So we're doing some work in Triborough at the moment, redesigning what case management system looks like for children's social care, through to redesigning entire transport networks. So we're building a piece of technology that enables people in rural Essex and Suffolk to arrange their own demand-responsive transport. So anything kind of big and service and digital, but also thinking about strategy and helping councils think about how they do digital and how they do transformation and what kind of skills and capabilities and processes they would need in order to do that. So we are sort of made up of 3 disciplines, so service design, organisation design and product design. We tend to approach problems from this kind of holistic point of view. So we know that if you come in with a technology solution, often that's trying to be retrofitted to user needs. It doesn't actually solve any problems. If you just restructure stuff, it doesn't really necessarily change the way services are delivered or how they feel to users. And if you just design stuff, nothing can get implemented. So we kind of try and hit that sweet spot in the middle there. And today's talk is really about kind of how we make change happen. So as a designer in this sector, that's what I do, that's what motivates me, and I hope that resonates with a lot of you as well. And it's really, really hard. We recognise that public services aren't as good as they could be, they're not always meeting user needs, and they're not always financially sustainable, so this needs changing. And as an agency, we're totally not immune to this challenge of change and implementation. I think there was a statistic a few years ago, around 51% of work that agencies actually design doesn't get implemented. And we come across this problem a lot ourselves, but we are working to change that. And what we'd like to talk to you today is a kind of model for how we've done change within a local authority in Bexley. And that model, just very briefly, looks a little bit like this. So it's about delivering stuff early, so solving problems for that client really, really early and building their trust. It's about enabling others to use the same kind of tools and skills and things that we have to solve problems. It's about kind of setting the ambition and linking together what feel like maybe some small changes and some small things to actually, we can't just operate at this level, we need to think much bigger and think boldly about the future. So obviously alongside these things, we understand the service and we base ourselves there and we work really closely with them, but this feels like a kind of an interesting model for us to build on.
Thanks. I'm just going to kind of trap you here behind the table. So we want to talk to you today about making change happen, as Amy said, because we're quite passionate about really not just designing conceptually new solutions, but really thinking about, well, how do we make that land and how do we help services actually deliver those changes? And so we've picked a project to talk you through some of our lessons and our approaches to actually making that happen. And the project that we've picked is around working with the fostering team in the London Borough of Bexley. And basically there's 2 reasons that we've picked this project. And the first one being that we feel like we have actually been able on this project to achieve impact in quite a couple of areas. So I think there's quite some interesting lessons to be learned from it. But then the second reason is that it's actually quite remarkable that we've been able to do that, because fostering is a really, really challenging service. It's a really challenging environment to actually establish some change in. And so before we dive into what we've actually done with Bexley and with the fostering team over there, I just really quickly want to paint a bit of a picture of what fostering actually is, because I can imagine that not all of you might know. So fostering is just simply a service that your local authority has to provide for any child between 0 and 21 that for whatever reason can't live at home with their family. And that there might be lots of different reasons for that to be the case. So one of the reasons could be that they require specialist support and their family just simply feels like they can't provide it. But it could also be that the council decides that it's not safe enough for a child to stay with their family, and they're simply better off living somewhere else. So you can imagine that for a lot of children in this service, they've had quite traumatic upbringings and they've been through quite a lot. So it's quite a challenging environment in which we're trying to actually make some change happen. And one of the reasons that we think this is such an interesting area to look at is because councils spend lots and lots of money on social care. Not just adult social care, also children's social care. And this spending demand isn't going down, it's essentially going up. The thing that is going down is the budgets that they have to do it. So this provides a really, really big challenge for them to think about how do we now radically rethink some of the services that we offer, because we can't keep on doing it the way that we've done it before, and we need to rethink how we do it essentially. And another really interesting thing around looking at fostering is that despite all of this money being spent, fostering is one of the most expensive services that the council provides. The outcomes for young children are really not that great. So a lot of the children that have been in care, by the time that they're between 18 and 25, aren't in employment and education, if you compare that to the UK average. And so there's quite a lot of chunky challenges in this service area that really require some rethinking and some innovation to just make sure that better outcomes are happening. And so, as I said before, demand isn't going down, and that's the same in fostering. So currently there's about 52,000 children in the UK in care, and that number is rising. But what's interesting as well about that is that the number of teenagers coming into care is rising as well, and that provides an even more challenging situation for councils, because a lot of the foster carers that they have aren't experienced enough or equipped enough to look after teenagers and to provide a safe and stable placement for children that might have some quite challenging behaviors essentially. And that the risk that this creates is that children end up living with foster carers that are not experienced enough to provide a stable home, and that results quite often in what they call placement breakdowns. And placement breakdowns, it's just, if a placement breaks down, it simply means that a foster carer tells a child, look, I can't look after you anymore, you have to move on. And so you can imagine that having been through this disruptive experience of being taken out of your family home and then having to live with a stranger who's now telling you that they can't look after you anymore, that's quite traumatic. And it's not just traumatic for the child and the foster carer, it's also really expensive. Because the admin time that it takes to find a place for a child that's deemed or perceived as difficult to place is more than double than it takes for any other child. And so this poses quite a big problem for councils. And then on top of all of that, there's just simply not enough foster carers in the UK. So the fostering network have estimated that we need at least another 7,600 foster carers just in the coming year to be able to meet rising demand. And so painting a bit of a national picture around some of the chunky challenges that are happening in this service area, you can imagine that it's quite difficult. There's quite some big changes that need to happen and quite some radical rethinking that needs to happen. And so Bexley isn't very different. Bexley faces very similar challenges. But before we dive into what we actually did with them and how we worked with them on some of those challenges, I really quickly want to paint a bit of a picture of what it feels like for the fostering team there on the ground. So on any given day, they essentially face so many crises and breakdowns and things happening that they focus very much on immediate issues, and they've got very little headspace to think broader and wider and more proactively essentially about things that might need to change. So, any given moment, someone might walk up to the fostering team and say, you know what, I've just had a call, a placement has broken down, I need to find another place for that child to stay tonight, or I've just had a call from the police, or a child has run away and we don't know where they are. And you can imagine that these incidents don't happen between 9 and 5 during weekdays. So this is quite a high risk, quite a a challenging environment in which to make change happen. And so this results that in the team having very little headspace to think about how they, might want to progress foster carers. So there's a lot of focus on statutory training. We've literally heard from foster carers that, every year they have to do the same basic first aid training, whereas they want to think about, how do I now deal with cyberbullying, or is play therapy something that might help the child I'm looking after, or any more advanced experience, different type trainings, and they just simply don't get the chance to do that. And then on top of that, there's very limited insight because a lot of it is still very paper-based. So they just don't necessarily know, what types of children are in the service, why they are, why they've come in, and whether it was hard to find a placement for them, and why that might have been the case. And that also results in very limited capacity to think creatively and targeted about recruitment. So when we started working with the team, essentially year on year, they've been, posting out banners with it's difficult to say, but smiling toddlers on them, and phrases like "open your heart to Bexley," which if you put that next to the insight that they need people who are willing to look after, capable and willing to look after teenagers and to deal with quite, challenging situations, then that just simply doesn't match up. And so what the team asked us to do is to help them think about how we might support them to identify, recruit, and develop the right kind of carers for current and future demand. And Amy's going to take you through what we did with them and how we did that.
Thanks. Okay. So thinking back to that kind of early model I just showed, I'll kind of explain how that works in practice. So deliver early, as I said, it's about kind of identifying a problem for the service and just fixing that as quickly as you can. To build trust, to show that the approach works, that design, research, testing is valuable, and to just take some of that pain away and give them a bit more headspace. So when we started, we knew that they needed to recruit more carers, the right kind of carers, but they had very little insight into kind of what those gaps look like. We asked them where the gaps were. It was really anecdotal what they told us, but we didn't have any evidence for that. But we also knew that they kind of did quite manual reporting every week. So they reported on the number of children coming into care, but they didn't really report or record anywhere how hard those placements were to make, the reasons for them coming into care, anything really about the child. It was kind of in their heads. So what we did was recognise that they love Excel, they use it, they get it. We don't want to change that and make a new tool for them. So we just added 2 extra columns that added some of that more qualitative information that would enable the placement team to really understand who do we really need to recruit. We understand that kids coming in are roughly these kinds of ages and have these kinds of needs, therefore we can now recruit with insight rather than kind of finger in the air estimations. And as a result of that, that kind of building this tool for them, it meant that the 2 teams, the placement team, so the people that match the child to the placement, and the team that manage the children coming into care, it meant that they worked together more closely, because on the end of the tool, at the bottom of the spreadsheet, we asked the team that were managing the children coming into the service just to write down what kind of recommendations would we make to the placement team? What kind of carers do we think they need to recruit? So essentially, this tool kind of forced a conversation between the 2 teams that weren't really talking to each other, which was really interesting. And it means now that they're doing kind of more insightful matching. So enabling others. So, this is pretty straightforward. This is training, well, not formally training, but it's kind of buddying up, and it's teaching people how to problem solve in the way that we problem solve, essentially. So it's testing, doing research, it's evidence-based design. So I think, again, quite early, we recognised that they were making quite a few assumptions around what good recruitment looked like. So as Nina explained, it was these very sentimental messages on marketing materials. So we were really scared if they put teenagers on the posters, it would put people off. And we wanted to challenge that. So we wrote some copy, it's a bit naff. We're not marketing experts, but we just wanted to kind of test whether the messages resonated and we could challenge some of those assumptions. So we wrote some copy, we gave it to their comms department to design up some posters, and they went out and tested it. We didn't do it. We gave them the kind of tools and the questions, and we coached them and helped them understand how to ask open questions and how to test stuff, but they went out and tested it without us. And then they came back and they told the comms team, oh, that wording's not quite right, or let's change the image. So I think what I'd really like to, what I picture in my mind when I talk about this is a kind of loop. that sort of design cycle. So, research, make, test. And I think throughout that process, so traditionally we'd own that entire process, we'd do it on behalf of them, but slowly it's about kind of giving ownership of bits of that cycle to them. So by the end of it, there was this kind of closed loop. We can just step back, and they were testing and designing and researching completely without us, which was great to see. And the other thing that we designed was some development tools, so helping social workers have a conversation with their carer about, okay, what do you actually want to develop as a carer? What skills, what does your career path look like, essentially? That conversation just wasn't happening before. And we designed them in InDesign first, but really quickly recognised that actually if we leave them in Design and PDS, they're not going to edit, they're not going to test this stuff. So we converted them into Word. It sounds really simple, but we have to make stuff in their toolbox and in their language in order for them to change it and carry on developing it. Otherwise they just go, well, it's a static PDF, we'll just kind of roll that out now. So that was really important. And now that means instead of kind of jumping straight into delivery, they're talking about testing assumptions, and why don't we just test that, and kind of really questioning why they do what they do. And it's also giving them permission to do that as well, kind of show them a way of doing that. And then finally, the last thing is around setting the ambition. So some of these things may feel a little bit small. They are kind of tools, they're Excels and Words and things like that, but we recognise that change has to happen in kind of small ways, but it also has to happen, we have to know where we're headed, right? So we mapped out the entire sort of engagement experience, so thinking about what the foster carer goes through from being aware right through to kind of being trained and supported. And we helped them understand where their activities were at the moment. So they were focusing a lot of effort on kind of inquiry and answering phones, but not really thinking about what it looks like to kind of onboard someone into that job or help them join. And it also helped them think about where they'd want to go to next. So as part of that, we invited in some external speakers from across the private sector recruitment through to kind of peer-to-peer learning, and they shared their insights, and the team basically generated a bunch of ideas based on what they were learning from speakers. So just the value of hearing external speakers, they don't get that much, and it kind of just made a few penny drops. Around, for example, the team manager heard that another team had recruited 10 times the number of people into their service than he did with the same size recruitment team. So he couldn't just kind of go, oh, my team's too small anymore. He knew it was something about the way they were doing it that wasn't working. So I think for us there was a real shift in terms of the ambition. So at the start when we worked there, they were totally satisfied with just recruiting 20 foster carers a year. That was their target. They were fine meeting it. But by the end, they were talking about, why don't we become the recruiter of the southeast of England, which was this incredible journey that they'd gone on. As unrealistic as that may be for where they are right now, at least we stretched their ambition and their thinking, and we kind of helped them be a bit bold around that.
Yeah, so to sum it up, these are some of the approaches that we've used in making change happen. And again, we recognize it doesn't happen on all projects that it lands really well or that things are really happening sustainably. But just to summarize, I think delivering early is really about trying to find those sort of spots where you can deliver some really, really immediate value, not just in terms of the insight that you need, but especially for the people that you're working with, for the team, for the staff, because it's they work under such high pressure, and if you keep on talking about maybe ambitions or future user journeys, you're just going to lose them, and that's completely logical because they simply don't have the time. And if you can show them how the things that you're doing is actually helping them in their daily job, then you get a lot back for it essentially. And then the second thing, enabling others, is all about recognizing that design means change, and change can be hard. And it can be hard not because people don't want to change, but simply because it can be really, really difficult to work under certain circumstances, and then to find the space to step out of it, look at a problem from a different perspective, or find a way around the hurdles that you see. So it's not because people don't want to, but simply because they sometimes can't really see how to make the next step. And so recognizing that and being very intentional about buddying up and taking time and making an effort around, we're going to go through a couple of iterations of the same thing simply because that will help it land, which might be less exciting for us, but very exciting in terms of helping them make it their own and change it to something that works for them is really, really powerful, I think. And last but not least, setting that ambition, don't losing sight of that bigger, bolder thinking that we're here to do as well, because as we discussed in the beginning, there's quite some big problems happening in fostering, and so helping them set that ambition, but especially helping them set an ambition that they believe in, that they can achieve, that they can stand behind, and that they can say, you know what, I thought it was ridiculous to recruit 200, but now I can sort of see where we might start, and really painting that picture of that full, end-to-end journey and the ambition of where they might get to. I think is really important as well. And so I think those are some of the ways in which we've tried to make change happen on this project, and some of the lessons that we've learned along the way that we really wanted to share with you. But I think what we're really curious about to hear from you is what are some of the tactics that you use to really make change happen and make it land through design, especially maybe even from an in-house perspective, how that might be different, or some of the things that you'd like to share. So that's it. Thanks for listening, and